Welcome to the U.S. Manufacturing Today podcast, your hub of information about the U.S. manufacturing and distribution industry. Brought to you by Variable, the on-demand labor solution revitalizing and optimizing your operation, enabling just-in-time response to demand, more efficient production, and lower cost per unit. And now your host and head of reindustrialization at Variable, Matt Harine.
Welcome to U.S. Manufacturing Today, the podcast powered by Variable, where we talk with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of American industry, along with providing regular updates on the state of manufacturing, the changing landscape, policies, and more. Today is a solo episode, a great time to take a break and digest some of the current macro conditions with a few perspectives from several different markets and voices from across American industry. Because while a lot of the financial press is obsessing over global oil panic and freight uncertainty, the people who actually understand American production, the ones on the shop floor, are starting to see something potentially different. There could be a competitive advantage in this, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We've got three converging stories right now that I think are flying under the radar for most people. Freight market dynamics that are quietly setting up for a structural shift, an oil pricing inversion that is creating a real and durable cost advantage for U.S. manufacturers, and a labor story in the freight sector that almost nobody is connecting to the bigger picture. So let's get into it. If you've been watching the freight market, you know the narrative has been soft for a couple of years. Excess capacity, suppressed rates, carriers bleeding. The conventional wisdom going into 2026 was pretty subdued. But here's what's actually happening underneath that surface level softness. Capacity is leaving the market, quietly but persistently. Carrier exits have been accelerating, and the pool of available trucks, particularly in long haul, is shrinking faster than most shippers realize. C.H. Robinson revised their 2026 truckload spot rate forecast upward from 6% to approximately 8% year-over-year growth, and noted that with a shrinking pool of carriers, disruptions result in a stronger magnitude of rate increases. In other words, the market has become more fragile and more reactive. Small demand shocks are creating outsized ripples, and there are already early demand signals worth paying attention to. The RXO Curve Index, their proprietary spot rate model, has turned up. Spot rates have overtaken contract rates, and this is likely to persist in the months to come. Now, here's why that matters for manufacturing. Spot rates over contract is a signal. It means the market is tightening at the margins. When spot runs above contract, shippers start to feel it. Carriers start to feel confidence, and when confidence returns to carriers, investment follows in equipment, in new drivers, and capacity that will serve the next production surge. Transportation Insight put it well in their Q1 outlook. Freight markets enter 26 stable on the surface, but quietly tightening underneath. That's the setup. That's the coil spring being compressed. And what compresses a coil spring is demand coming back into a market that has structurally reduced its capacity. One more data point here worth flagging. Spot rates from November to December saw an uptick in the mid-single digits month to month that was shattered this year with a 15% increase. When a freight analyst at DAT called it a potential structural shift, it's not just seasonality. That's where people begin to listen. We'll be keeping an eye on this all year. Now, the second segment of this is the immigration enforcement effect on that freight labor. And here's a piece of that story that almost nobody is connecting properly to the bigger manufacturing picture, but we flagged early on in this show, going all the way back to some of our first episodes with American Truckers United. The federal government and multiple states are now actively enforcing immigration-related standards in the trucking industry, and the effect on the labor pool is real. The FMCSA finalized new rules on non-domiciled CDL holders. Enforcement of English proficiency standards is tightening, and analysts are starting to put numbers to the potential impact. The administration's crackdown on non-domiciled CDL holders and drivers who fail to meet English proficiency standards could remove 10% to 15% of industry capacity. Think about that number, 10 to 15% of capacity in a market that is already structurally tightening. What does that mean? It means wages go up for American truck drivers. It means labor dumping, the practice of using low-cost foreign labor to suppress domestic wages in the freight sector, gets corrected. And it means freight tightens in the production heartland, specifically where industrial and manufacturing freight originates. This isn't chaos. This is a rebalancing, and for the American worker in this industry, it's long overdue. Lower interest rates, tax incentives within the new economic bill, and increased U.S. manufacturing tied to tariff policy are expected to stimulate additional freight demand. At the same time, supply is contracting. With reduced capacity and increased demand, pricing should begin to firm by mid-year of 2026 and return to higher levels in 2027. If you're a carrier, that is the light at the end of a very long tunnel. If you're a manufacturer, that's your signal to lock in a good freight relationship now. And if you're an American truck driver, welcome back to a market that's working for you again. Now I want to talk about something that is happening in real time right now this week, and even before this episode gets published, that I think is one of the most important and underappreciated competitive dynamics for U.S. manufacturers. It's the Brent WTI spread, and right now it is historic. Let me break this down for listeners who aren't deep in energy markets or constantly checking the price of oil. There are two main benchmarks for crude oil pricing. Brent crude is the global benchmark. It prices seaborne oil traded internationally. WTI, which is West Texas Intermediate, is the American benchmark. It reflects what domestic crude actually costs right here in Cushing, Oklahoma, flowing out of our shale fields. For most of history, these two prices traded in parity and very close together. Sometimes WTI was actually above Brent. But right now, we are in a divergence that analysts are calling an 11-year high in the Brent WTI spread. Brent crude surged nearly 7% to above $114 per barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate edged up to just 0.2% to around $96 per barrel. That's roughly an $18 per barrel gap, which is both are higher than they were in the weeks prior to the launch of Operation Epic Fury in Iran. But why? It's because of that escalating military conflict, and seaborne crude markets are experiencing intensifying stress while WTI remains anchored by domestic inventories, steady shale output, and expectations of potential U.S. policy intervention. Here's what this means in plain language. Your competitor in Germany, in South Korea, or in China, they are buying oil at over $110 a barrel. Their diesel costs, their petrochemical inputs, their plastics, their resins, their freight is all priced based off of Brent. You, the American manufacturer running your plant in Ohio or Texas or the Carolinas, are buying energy off WTI, which is sitting roughly $15 to $20 a barrel lower than the global price right now. The divergence between Brent and WTI highlights two different market realities: a globally integrated oil market facing logistical and geopolitical constraints, and a U.S. market that is more insulated by domestic production. This is energy sovereignty paying dividends. It's what the administration led with to lower inflation and their longtime policy goal of having more investment in American energy dominance. It's not just a political slogan, it's a structural cost advantage right now on your balance sheet. The EIA forecasts that U.S. crude oil production will average 13.6 million barrels per day in 2026 and rise to 13.8 million barrels per day by 2027. We are producing at record levels, and that production is a buffer, or a moat, between American industry and the energy chaos hammering our global competitors. So let me put it one more way. When the Strait of Hormuz tightens, Europe panics. Asia scrambles, but the Permian Basin keeps pumping. The Bakken, the Eagle Ford don't care necessarily what happens in the Persian Gulf. That is an industrial advantage of the first order. And if you're running a domestic manufacturing operation right now, you should understand that your energy cost structure is a weapon relative to your international competition in a way it hasn't been in at least a decade. So let's connect these threads because they don't exist in isolation. They reinforce each other. Domestic energy advantage means lower input costs. Lower input costs improve margins. Better margins fund expansion. Expansion drives more freight. More freight in a tightening capacity market means production is accelerating and what is driving that freight. And here's the thing about the freight tightening story. Elevated U.S. crude oil production provides a stable backdrop for diesel prices and lowers the risk of a fuel-driven spike in freight costs this year. So even as freight capacity tightens and rates rise, the fuel component of freight costs is being stabilized by the same American energy advantages we just talked about. That's a compounding tailwind, not one factor or two factors. It's a system of reinforcing advantages that are starting to click into place at the same time. Meanwhile, the global competitor, the one your customer was sourcing from 5 years ago, or maybe even just a few months ago in a distant country, is getting squeezed on energy, squeezed on freight, squeezed on tariffs, and squeezed on their reliability. And the reshoring math is starting to work in your favor in ways that weren't true just 12 months ago. This is the moment we've been building toward, and the data is starting to confirm it. When you put the whole picture together, manufacturing PMI is back in expansion mode above 52, new orders seem to be surging and backlogs are rebuilding, freight quietly tightening from the supply side with demand about to add fuel to that fire, and an oil price inversion that gives American producers a structural energy cost advantage over their global competition. That's an 11-year high differential. Labor enforcement in freight that is finally returning wages and dignity to the American truck driver, policy tailwinds in the form of tax incentives, industrial legislation, and an administration that has made reindustrialization a national security priority and part of their national security strategy. This isn't a single signal, it's a convergence, and convergence moments in manufacturing, in freight, and in energy don't happen often. But when they do, the companies that recognize them early and positioned accordingly are the ones who look like geniuses 2 years from now. It seems to me we're at that moment. There's a renewed sense of confidence running through American industry right now, but it's not loud. It's not on the cover of every magazine. It's there, in the order books that are starting to fill and freight lanes that are starting to firm up, and in the energy advantage that's widening every day. The Strait of Hormuz stays under pressure. The people building things in this country are the backbone of what makes America work, and the conditions are lining up to reward them for that. We'll keep tracking the signals. We have some incredible guests coming up, people who called these shifts early, operators making real change on the ground, and advocates building the legislative framework for the next era of American industry. So stay locked in with us as we continue to monitor the situation, and thank you as always for listening to U.S. Manufacturing Today. To stay ahead of the curve and to help plan your strategy, please check out our website at variableops.com and under the resources section titled Trump 2.0, where you can see the framework around upcoming policies and how they will impact you. If you're on socials, give us a follow on LinkedIn, X, Truth, or Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave us a rating, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for joining us and learning more about how you can make your way.